Get going here. Good evening. Time for some more Secret History of the World. So we are not quite halfway through the book. We're 40% according to the Kindle app. We're on chapter 14 tonight. So um, the multi-part title to this chapter is the Mysteries of Greece and Rome, the Eleusinian Mysteries, Socrates and his daemon, Plato as a magus, the divine identity of Alexander the Great, the Caesars and Cicero, and the rise of the Magi. So, hop right on into it here. If we see in the Athenians a gift for free individual thought, we see in Sparta the development of individual will, competitive edge, and admiration, to the point of hero worship of strong men. Heroes created the space for the flowering of Greek culture, which in the 5th century BC began to set standards in beauty of form and rigor of intellect that we have aspired to match ever since. This was the Greece of the great initiates, the philosophers. Of the initiates. The philosophers Plato and Aristotle, the poet Pindar, and the dramatists Sophocles and Euripides. The most famous of all the Greek mystery schools was situated at Eleusis, a hamlet a few miles from Athens. The Roman statesman Cicero, himself an initiate, would say that the Eleusinian mysteries and what flowed from them formed the greatest benefit that Athens gave to the civilized world. Eleusis comes from Elano, I'm going to say Elano, meaning I come, which is to say I come into being. There is almost nothing left of the sanctuary, just a few scattered stones and a couple of panels from inside have survived, but a contemporary description of it talks of an unmarked exterior wall of gray-blue stone. Inside there were painted statues and friezes of goddesses, sheaves of grain, and 8-petaled flowers. One account says there was an aperture in the ceiling of the inner sanctum that provided the only light source. The lesser mysteries were celebrated in the spring. They involved rites of purification and also dramatizations of stories of the gods. A statue of a god crowned with myrtle and carrying a torch was led in procession with singing and dancing. The god was sacrificed and died for 3 days. When the sacrificed god was represented as being raised from the dead, the assembled hierophants and candidates shouted, Lakos, Lakos, Lakos. There was also, I guess that's what that, or is it Iakos? Is that an I? That might be a capital I instead of an L. I don't know. Anyway, there was also an overtly sexual element in these celebrations. Cellus, a Byzantine scholar, wrote that Venus was portrayed as rising out of the sea from in between moving representations of female genitalia, and that afterwards the marriage of Persephone and Hades took place. It was recorded by Clement of Alexandria that the rape of Persephone was enacted, and it was also said by Athenagoras that during this bizarre, violent, almost surreal drama, she was portrayed as having a horn on her forehead, perhaps symbolizing the third eye. There were also accounts of ceremonial pouring of milk from a golden vessel in the shape of a breast. On one level, this is obviously connected with the worship of the mother goddess, but it should alert us to the fact that on a deeper level, these ceremonies were concerned with life after death. We know from Pythagoras that the Milky Way was conceived of as a vast river or troop of spirits. Okay. The star-like spirits of the dead ascended through the gate of Capricorn and up through the spheres, before descending back into the material world through the gate of Cancer. Pindar said, quote, "Happy is he who has seen the mysteries before being buried beneath the ground, because he knows what happens as life ends." End quote. Sophocles said, quote, "Thrice happy are those who have seen the mysteries before they die. They will have life after death. Everyone else will only experience suffering." End quote. Plutarch said that those who die experience for the first time what those who have been initiated have already experienced. The greater mysteries celebrated on or about the autumn equinox were preceded by 9 days of fasting, after which candidates for initiation were given a potent drink called the Kykeon. I don't know, Kykeon. Okay, and we have a picture. Surviving panel from Eleusis showing Demeter and a candidate for initiation. So let me bring that up. Okay. Demeter and a candidate for initiation. I'm going to say this is probably Demeter on this side. And then the candidate would be here in between. That would be my guess. I could be wrong. If you know, let me know. Of course, extreme hunger can by itself lead to a visionary state, or at least a propensity for hallucinations. After fasting for so long, the candidate drank this mixture of roasted barley, water, and pole oil, which can be narcotic if taken in sufficient quantities. I don't know what pole oil is. Poley. I'll have to look that up. The mysteries were known to involve people in the most intense experiences, the wildest fears, blackest horrors, and raptures. Plutarch wrote of the terror of those about to be initiated as if they were about to die, and, of course, in a sense, they were. Imagine if you had seen dramatic presentations of terrifying supernatural events in the lesser mysteries and now believed these things were going to happen for real, that you were going to take part in a drama in which you would be killed and in some sense really die. The accounts by Proclus suggest candidates were attacked by, quote, "the rushing forms of troops of earthly demons," end quote. Though it was by this time very difficult for the higher spiritual beings, the gods, to squeeze down into a dense material realm, it was relatively easy for lesser spirits such as demons and spirits of the dead. The candidate was to be shamed and punished, tortured by demons. Pausanias, in his description of Greece, a title, describes a demon called Euronymous with black skin, with blue black skin like a fly's, who devoured the flesh of rotting corpses. Are we to take this as literally true? As mentioned earlier, these initiation ceremonies were part ritual and drama and part seance. That drugs played a part in conjuring up these demons does not necessarily, from an idealist point of view, mean that they were illusory. We should also remember that in rural India, perfectly respectable religious ceremonies still take place. The worship of lesser spirits, the pretas and boots, I'm not sure, Bhuts, and pisachas and gandharvas, ceremonies which we in the West would classify as seances. Okay, it says we're in a ad, but I'll just read this next one. Oh, there goes the ad. All right, we'll wait. And this is a perfect opportunity to try out this wine I opened and I've been letting breathe for a minute. Okay, we got 15 seconds left. So where was I? Right. We would classify as seances. Okay, I know where I'm at. We got two fairly long chapters, so. Okay, the mystery schools will pick up where we left off. The mystery schools were concerned with granting the candidate an authentic spiritual experience, which in the context of idealistic philosophy means a genuine experience of spirits. First demons, and then spirits of the dead, then later the gods. By the 5th century BC, it was of course difficult for a god without a material body to affect matter directly, to move a heavy object, for example, but the initiate priests could mouth magic words into a cloud of smoke emanating from a sacrificial fire, and the face of a god would sometimes appear. Karl von Eckartshausen, the late 18th century theosophist, recorded the most effective fumigations for causing apparitions: hemlock, henbane, saffron, aloe, opium, mandrake, celorum, poppy seed, asafoetida, or tita, whatever, and parsley. You got two opiates in there. Okay. The miraculously lifelike statues for which Greece is famous emerged from the mystery schools. Their original function was to help bring the gods to earth. We know from the earlier use of statues in Egypt and Sumeria that it was intended that the gods occupy them, live in them as their physical bodies, and make them come alive. If you stood in front of the statue of Artemis in Ephesus, the Mother Earth loomed over you like a great tree. You had a sensation of being absorbed into the vegetable matrix of the cosmos, the great ocean of weaving waves of light and of being at one with it. The statues would breathe, seem to move. It was said that sometimes they would speak to you. After various trials and the successful candidate was allowed to ascend to the Empyrean realm, a place flooded with light, music, and dancing. Dionysus, Bacchus, or Iacchus, or Iacchus, I don't know, appeared in a beautiful, radiant vision of light. Aristides, the orator, recalled, quote, "I thought I felt the god draw near, and I touched him. I was somewhere between waking and sleeping. My spirit was so light, in a way someone who hasn't been initiated wouldn't understand." End quote. By this lightness of spirit he was referring to an out-of-body experience. It also seems clear that the gods sometimes occupied ethereal vegetable bodies in the mysteries, and so appeared like luminous specters or phantoms. So the process of initiation gave direct existential, undeniable, first-hand knowledge that the spirit could live outside the body, and while in this state, the candidate became a spirit among spirits, a god among gods. When the new initiate was born again, quote unquote, into the everyday material world, when he was crowned as an initiate, he retained many godlike powers of perception and abilities to influence events. And we have another um, picture with a lot going on. So let me read the caption for it. In the upside down, other way around doctrine of the secret societies, the Greeks created the first statues of perfect human bodies because human bodies only became perfectly formed at this point in time. The Greek cult of the body arose from the fresh experience of the perfect form. I don't know what that has to do with this picture, but um, it's a very interesting one. I'm actually going to blow it up a bit because it's hard to see what's going on. There's a ton going on here, though. Okay, so I don't know if you're supposed to start at the top or the bottom, but starting at the top, looks like we have someone lying prone. Then we've got this guy dragging this guy by the foot, it looks like. This guy's being chased by this guy. Another prone body. kind of falling body maybe, and then looks like the same guy as we have here is standing. Now he's turned back the other direction, and I see this tree looking thing. This guy kneeling looks like he has his hands bound behind his back. Not sure what I see going on there. Pushing the guy down. I don't. There's a ton going on here. It's hard to really um, tell what it's all supposed to be. Then we have the guy sitting on a mound and being attended to by a lion, I want to say. Some of these almost look like a battle or something, a fight, maybe a one-on-one fight. But then at several points, he looks like his hands are bound behind him. Here in this bottom corner, he looks like his hands are bound. Here in bottom center, he looks like his hands are bound. Here it looks like he may be being bound. Some strange stuff going on in that picture. I don't know. I have to really spend some time studying that one to understand what the heck I'm seeing. Um, that picture is followed up by immediately by another picture. I'll read the caption for it. Otherwise known as the Wand of Hermes, the caduceus was a pole with two snakes entwined. The thyrsus was a representation of the caduceus, probably made out of a hollow stalk like that of a fennel, in which Prometheus carried fire down to illumine humankind. The thyrsus, in which the secret sacred fire is hidden, is the Shushumna Nadi of Indian occult physiology. On top of the stalk was a pine cone representing the pineal gland. Okay, so let's go to this picture. I do see a caduceus. I don't see a thyrsus. I may be overlooking it. I don't see a thyrsus. I do see the caduceus down here on the lower left. Um, anyway. Um, the experience of initiation was, therefore, a mystical one. However, as we have seen in the case of Pythagoras, practical and even scientific knowledge was shown to be implicit in this experience too. After initiation, the Hierophant would elucidate what the new initiate had just experienced, drawing arcane disclosures from a book made of two stone tablets called the Book of Interpretation. They taught the way the material world and the material human body had been formed, and the way both were directed by the spirit worlds. To help them in their teaching, they also used symbols. These included the thyrsus, made of a reed, sometimes with 7 knots, and topped with a pine cone. There were also the toys of Dionysus, quote unquote, a golden serpent, a phallus, an egg, and a spinning top that made the sound om. Cicero would write that when you come to understand them, the occult mysteries have more to do with natural science than with religion. There was a prophetic element in this teaching, too. The final initiation at Eleusis involved the candidate being shown a plucked green wheat ear held up in silence. Of course, on one level, the mysteries were agricultural and looked forward to a good harvest, but there was another level to do with the harvesting of souls. This wheat was the star Spica, the divine seed, held in the left hand of the virgin goddess of the constellation of Virgo. I'm talking, of course, about the goddess the Egyptians called Isis. The grains the grains she holds looks forward to the great cosmic seed time. It will be made into the bread of the Last Supper, symbolizing the vegetable body in Jesus Christ and also the vegetative dimension. or altered state of consciousness we all must work ourselves into according to esoteric Christianity if we are to meet him there. Okay. And we have another picture. Um, the importance of Spica in the ancient world is shown by the fact that apart from Sirius, it is the only star represented on the famous planisphere at Dendera, a section of which is produced here. The great cosmic wheel grinds all the stars except for this single one that is saved just outside its rim. Okay, I'm not sure how well we'll be able to see this. It's pretty. Okay, so a lot of symbols that are hard to make out. Pictures of figures and like bipedal figures all through here. This one is seated. This looks like the bull with the sun disk between its horns. I forget which one that is. Um, I mean, is that Taurus or is it, I don't know. I don't know. This is looks like a coiled snake or a not a coiled, an undulating snake. It's hard to make out a lot of that. But gotta show you the pictures, man. Okay, so again we see that the vegetative dimension of the cosmos is the focus of esoteric thought. In Plato's philosophy, it is the soul, the mediator between the material body and the animal spirit. If we are to leave behind the material world and enter the spirit worlds, this vegetative dimension must be the subject of our work. There are other ways that spirits could influence events. Everyone who contemplates one of the busts of Socrates that have survived may be struck by the lively satyr-like quality of his physiognomy. In the secret tradition, Socrates was a reincarnation of the great spirit who had previously lived in the body of Silenus. Okay, so then we have a short, very short description of two side-by-side pictures, gem carvings of Silenus and Socrates, and I am assuming that means that they are side by that it's in that order. Silenus will be the one on my left, and then on the right will be Socrates. I'm pretty sure. So here you go. They're pretty small. So I would assume this one with the wreath around of ivy or whatever that's supposed to be around his head is Silenus, and that this other one is Socrates. I could be wrong. Again, I might be just pulling that out of my ass. I don't know. Okay, we're following that with yet another picture, and it has a bit longer caption. The death of es- Aeschylus. I know I mispronounced those. Carved on a gem. Aeschylus was the son of a priest at Eleusis. He was threatened with execution for having betrayed the secrets of the mysteries by portraying them on stage. He escaped execution by claiming that he had never been initiated, but when an eagle dropped a rock from a great height on his bald head, killing him, many interpreted this as divine retribution. Okay, this would be him. The eagle carrying the, I guess that's supposed to be a big rock. And he does have a bald head. Okay, Socrates sometimes spoke of his daemon. That's the Daemon spelling, um, meaning a good spirit who guided him through life. Today, this might seem an alien concept, but the following account of the daemon in modern times is perhaps instructive. It is an incident recalled by a pupil of the Russian esoteric philosopher P.D. Ouspensky, a formative influence on many of the great writers and artists of the 20th century, including the poet and playwright T.S. Eliot, the architect Frank Lloyd Wright, and the artists Kazimir Malevich and Georgia O'Keeffe. This man, a lawyer, had been to hear a lecture by Ouspensky at a house in West London. He was walking away, puzzled by it and full of doubts. But as he did so, a voice inside him said, quote, "If you lose touch with this, you will be doing something that you will regret for the rest of your life." End quote. He wondered where this voice came from. Eventually, he found an explanation in Ouspensky's teachings, and I have never read any Ouspensky. Oh, hey Vesper, how you doing? I am doing great. We're yeah, not very far into it. Where I'm only about 8-10 pages into the first chapter for the night. I started a little early. How are you doing tonight? Eventually, he found an explanation in Ouspensky's teachings. The voice was his higher self. One of the great aims of the process of initiation he found himself undertaking was to so alter his consciousness that he would be able to hear this voice all the time. I'm actually going to try something here. Um, I have to bring up a file, though. Bear with me 1 second. I'm no good at remembering how to do this shout out stuff, so I'm going to try it. Um, I've tried and failed a number of times with other people, but I'm going to try it with you. Let's see if that works. I don't know if it will. Hey! I gave a shout out. Moving up in the world, getting better. All right. If you don't, if you are listening and you don't follow Vesper, you really should. Pretty cool guy. Plays lots and lots of retro games that we all remember from our childhood, um, unless we were just isolated away from the world. Um, no worries, man. I'm glad I finally figured out how to do it. I've been working on it, and I screw it up most of the time. But now I got it. So let's get back to the reading here. I'm good, especially since we're talking about Socrates. Yeah, oh, that's right. You are the philosopher. You could probably tell me a lot about this. I've studied very little in the way of philosophy. I think I told you once I took a intro to philosophy class, and the guy teaching it, um, he assumed you had already read philosophy and studied it for years before you ever came to his class. So if you didn't understand something immediately, then he just had no time for you. You were an idiot and you were wasting his time. And it was like, yeah, you're just a jackass, not a philosopher, and certainly not a good teacher. Um, okay, let's see. Did I read? Okay, this was. This voice was his higher self. One of the great aims of the process of initiation he found himself undertaking was to so alter his consciousness that he would be able to hear this voice all the time. I know I read that already, but Socrates was a man guided by his conscience in this way. He carried forward the great project of converting instinctive wisdom of the lower animal self into concepts, and his philosophy, like that of Pythagoras, is not merely academic. It is also a philosophy of life. The aim of all philosophy, he said, is to teach one how to die. There is some dispute even within the secret schools as to whether or not Socrates was an initiate. The only thing I have in common with them is that I have a desire to quest towards the truth. Uh, that's all any of us can really do. Um, when accused of corrupting the youth of Athens and of not believing in the gods, Socrates committed suicide by drinking hemlock. He died forgiving his executioners. The oath against suicide was one of the most terrible taken by initiates. It's because, uh, um, what? Oh, it's become commonplace to say that religion has had a negative, even destructive effect on human history. Wars of religion, the Inquisition, the suppression of scientific thought, and restrictive patriarchal attitudes are routinely cited. It is worth remembering that some of the greater glories of human culture had their origins in the mystery schools that were a central part of organized religion in the ancient world. Not only sculpture and drama, but also philosophy, mathematics, and astronomy, as well as political and medical ideas, arose out of this religious institution. Above all, the mystery schools influenced the evolution of consciousness. Too many people claim to be philosophers, yet they only follow a single school or teacher. Yeah, and that's just being a groupie, really. You're a fan of one particular person. You're definitely not a philosopher because you're not. I mean, I've always understood it as being thinking outside the box and expanding your horizon, expanding your mind, and thinking about things in ways that you wouldn't normally think about them, or making arguments that you wouldn't normally make to explore the idea. Um, that's all. That's my concept. Um, and if you're just sticking to one school, then yeah, you're just a fanboy. Um, okay, where were we? Conventional history puts little emphasis on the evolution of consciousness, but we can see it in action again if we look at changes in Greek drama. In the plays of Aeschylus and Sophocles, the first dramatists to have their work performed outside the mystery schools, wrongdoing results in persecution by the winged demons called Erinyes or Furies. For example, in the Orestia of Aeschylus of 458 BC, uh, I think that's the end of the sentence, actually, yeah. By Euripides' play of 428 BC, Hippolytus, this this chiding has been internalized and given a name. Quote, there is only one thing that can survive all life's trials, a quiet conscience, end quote. In conventional history, it is assumed that people have always been pricked by conscience. On this view, Euripides was simply the first person to put a name to it. In the upside down, other way around thinking of esoteric tradition, the reason that there is no suggestion of conscience in any of the annals of human experience up to that point is that the Eleusinian mysteries forged this new dimension of human experience. Okay, and then we have another picture, and this is, ew, ugly, ugly dude. Um, Startling statue of an actor in a mask, that explains it. Aristophanes satirized the mysteries in The Frogs. If tragedy dramatized the machinations of Satan in the world, comedy dramatized the machinations of Lucifer. Okay, let me show you that picture, the actor in the mask. Okay. I'm not sure what he's supposed to be, but there you have it. Okay. Great dramatic art shows we often don't feel exactly what convention tells us we should feel. It shows us new ways of being, feeling, thinking, willing, perceiving. To borrow a phrase of Saul Bellows, it opens the human condition a little wider. I absolutely hate that term, the human condition. I don't know why. It just rubs me the wrong way. It just feels all wrong. Anyway, um, when we experience Greek drama, we are purged by catharsis. The Greek dramatists give their audiences an experience which is an echo of the experience of initiation, and their way of working is based on an understanding of human nature that is essentially initiatic. Our animal body has been corrupted. It has become hardened and carries something like a protective carapace. We become comfortable with this carapace, though. We even grow to rely on it. But our easy, basking lives have been made possible by blood spilled, torture, theft, injustice, and deep down we know it. So deep inside us there is a self loathing that prevents us from living wholly in the moment, from living life to the full. We cannot truly love or be loved until the insect like carapace is cut open by the agonizing process of initiation. Until we reach that point, we don't know what life is meant to be like. When we see a great production of one of the tragedies inspired by the experience of initiation, Oedipus Rex, for example, or King Lear, we may catch an echo of this process. If some of the ideas of the Greeks are hard to understand, hard to accept, others may at first glance look rather obvious, even bland, to the extent you might even think they are hardly worth saying at all. The handful of sayings attributed to Pythagoras that have survived include, above all things respect yourself, and do not yield to temptation except when you agree to be untrue to yourself. In order to understand why these were challenging, even astounding things to say, things that shook the world and as a result have been remembered down the ages, we have to see them in the context of a newly burgeoning sense of self. Similarly, when Socrates said, "An unconsidered life is not worth living," he was addressing people who, up to that point, had had no faculty for abstract thought with which to contemplate their lives. This was the great gift of Socrates to the world. When Socrates died, his pupil Plato became the leading figure in Greek philosophy. Plato was born in 428 into one of the first generations systematically taught to read. He founded the academy in the garden of the tomb of Academus in Athens. His dialogues are the greatest expression of the mind before matter philosophy called idealism that is at the heart of this book. In the secret history, everyone had experienced the world in an idealistic way up to this time. Everyone's form of consciousness was such that he would not have questioned that ideas are a higher form of reality than objects. Everyone believed this unthinkingly, instinctively. It only became necessary for a great initiate to conceptualize the idealistic worldview and write it down in systematic terms at the point when consciousness had evolved to a stage that people could conceive of the opposing point of view. Plato's pupil, Aristotle, made the philosophical leaps forward that would lead to the materialism that is the dominant philosophy today. Plato's idealism is easy for us to misinterpret. It naturally seems to us to follow that if the material world is a precipitate of our mental processes, we should be able to manipulate the world in a very obvious and direct way just by thinking about it. In fact, if the world is nothing more than a sort of giant hologram, then couldn't it just be switched off? In The Principles of Human Knowledge, Bishop Berkeley, the most influential philosopher of idealism in English, advocated a version of idealism according to which matter has no existence independent of perception. And this is the version of idealism most familiar to students of philosophy in Anglo-American universities. But as a matter of historical fact, it is not the position held by the great majority of people throughout history who had who have believed in idealism. As I have already suggested, these people experienced the world in an idealistic way. The faculty of imagination was much stronger than the faculty for thinking, which was then only beginning to develop. They believed that the objects of the imagination were more real than the objects of the senses, but this does not necessarily mean that the latter are totally unreal. Most people in history who have believed in idealism as a philosophy of life have believed in matter being precipitated out of mind as a historical process that took place gradually and over vast periods of time. They have also believed and still believe that the hologram will, as it were, be switched off, but again gradually and over equally vast stretches of time. That reminds me, one of the books I want to read on this stream someday eventually is The Holographic Universe. Today's university students debating the pros and cons of idealism probably find it difficult to equate Platonic ideas with gods and angels, as we have been doing. This association risks seeming crudely anthropomorphic to modern sensibility. But again, as a matter of historical fact, people who believed in idealism as a philosophy of life have always tended to believe in spirits, gods, and angels. When considering the great world-weaving cosmic thoughts, the active principles behind the appearances of things, many idealists have asked themselves how far it is appropriate to consider them as being conscious beings like ourselves. Idealists like Cicero and Newton have considered these intelligencers, to use Newton's name for them, neither as crudely impersonal nor crudely personal. Cicero and Newton were neither crudely polytheistic nor crudely monotheistic. They experienced life as meaningful and the cosmos as meant. They believed then that something like human qualities, indeed something like human consciousness, is built into the structure of the cosmos. It's an interesting, that really stands out to me. The experience, the cosmos as meant. Like, it's not just an accident that the cosmos exists. I'm going to think on that on my own. And crucially, initiates of the secret societies, like initiates of the mystery schools, encountered these disembodied intelligencers in altered states of consciousness. It is Goethe, perhaps, who, I know I still pronounce that wrong, and I do speak some German, and I still can't quite get that one. Perhaps Goethe, who writes best about what it feels like to be an idealist in modern times. He writes about feeling the real presence of living interconnections with the natural world and living connections with other people, even though such connections may not be measurable or visible. And crucially, he writes about the great universal spirits that hold everything together. What Newton called intelligencers, Goethe calls the mothers. And then we have quite a long quote here, followed immediately by another fairly long quote. So, we all walk in the mysteries. We do not know what is stirring in the atmosphere that surrounds us, nor how it is connected with our own spirit. So much is certain that we can at times put out the feelers of our soul beyond its bodily limits. One soul may have a decided influence upon another merely by means of its silent presence, of which I could relate many instances. It has often happened to me that when I have been walking with an acquaintance and have had a living image of something in my mind, he has at once begun to speak of that very thing. I have also known a man who, without saying a word, could suddenly silence a party engaged in conversation by the mere power of his mind. We all have some electrical and magnetic forces within us, and we put forth, like the magnet itself, some attractive or repulsive power. With lovers, this magnetic power is particularly strong and acts even at a distance. In my younger days, I have experienced cases enough when, during my solitary walks, I have felt a great desire for the company of a beloved girl, and have thought of her till she has really come to meet me. I was so restless in my room, she has said, that I could not help coming here. End quote. Uh, Goethe went on to speak about the living connections that underlie such phenomena. And now we start our second big long quote. Dwelling in eternal obscurity and loneliness, these mothers are creative beings. They are the creative and sustaining principle from which proceeds everything that has life and form on the surface of the earth. Whatever ceases to breathe returns to them as a spiritual nature, and they preserve it until there arises occasion for its renewed existence. All souls and forms of what has been or will be hover about like cloud in the vast space of their abode. The magician must enter their dominion if he would obtain power over the form of a being. End quote. In the 5th century BC, Athens and Sparta had fought for dominance. In the 4th century, they were both overtaken by Macedonia, ruled by the robust Philip II. Plutarch noted that Philip's son Alexander was born on the very day in 356 BC that the temple at Ephesus was torched by a lunatic. Each mystery school taught a wisdom unique to it, which is why Moses and Pythagoras were initiated into more than one. The hierophants at the mystery school, attached to the temple at Ephesus, taught the mysteries of Mother Earth, the powers that shape the natural world. In a sense, the spirit of this school entered Alexander at birth. Alexander would spend his whole life trying to identify this divine element within. One day, the handsome, fearless boy with the burning eyes and the leonine mane tamed a magnificent but fiery horse called Bucephalus that none of Philip's generals could even mount. Philip cast about for the greatest mind of the day to be his son's tutor, and chose Plato's greatest pupil, Aristotle. Alexander and the older man recognized each other as kindred spirits. As soon as Plato gave formal conceptual expression to idealism, it was inevitable that its opposite would quickly be formulated. Instead of deducing the truth about the world from immaterial universal principles, Aristotle collected and classified the data of the material world. He worked out physical laws by a process of abstraction. Aristotle was therefore able to invent an entirely new and modern way of describing the hidden powers that shape nature. It is often said that the Roman Empire provided a vehicle for the spread of Christianity, and in the same way Alexander created the largest empire the world had yet seen. This then became the vehicle for Aristotle's philosophy. Philip was assassinated when his son was only 20, but immediately Alexander established himself as a ruler of genius and an unbeatable military commander. In 334 BC, he led an army into Asia, defeating the Persians at the Battle of Issus. It's a double S. It's Issus, so I'm assuming that's Issus, not ISIS. I guess it could be ISIS. I don't know. If you know, let me know. Even though they were outnumbered by as many as 10 to 1. Then he swept south through Syria and Phoenicia before conquering Egypt, where he founded the city of Alexandria. Wherever he went, he founded city-states on the Greek model, spreading Greek politics as well as Greek philosophy. It was part of Alexander's mission to save the newly evolved consciousness, forged by initiates such as Plato and Euripides, from being swamped by the greater wealth, grandeur, and military might of Asia. More particularly, he was to save the new rationality from being swept away by ancient ritualistic clairvoyance and picture consciousness. In 331 BC, Alexander defeated the Persians again, destroying their ancient capital of Persepolis, before pushing further into Afghanistan and finally into India. There he debated with Brahmin philosophers, the descendants of the rishis, admitted to watch the sacred initiatory rites of the Brahmins. Alexander's own priests were astonished to see how similar the ceremonies were to their own. There is a story that Alexander sent a Greek philosopher to summon a Brahmin teacher into his presence, offering great rewards and threatening decapitation if he refused. The philosopher finally tracked down the Brahmin in the depths of the forest and received the following rather dusty response. Quote, "The Brahmins neither fear death nor desire gold. We sleep deeply and peacefully on forest leaves. Were we to have any material possessions, this would only disturb our slumber. We move freely over the surface of the earth without conflict, and all our needs met, as by a mother who feeds her baby her milk." End quote. This was a rare knockback for Alexander. Until near the end of his life, it seemed no one could stand in his way. As has happened only a few times in history, an individual seemed able to bend the whole world to his will. As I've suggested, Alexander's entire life can be seen as a quest to understand the origins of this divine power. At different times, both Perseus and Hercules were claimed as his ancestors, according to variant traditions. Aristotle had given Alexander a copy of Homer's Iliad, which he learned off by heart, and he sometimes saw himself as a demigod like Achilles. In 332 BC, he went on an expedition to the temple of Ammon at the desert oasis of Siwa, some 500 miles west of Memphis in Egypt. It was said he nearly died on this expedition, though this may be a reference to a mystical death. What is certain is that he was recognized by the priests and initiated there. It is sometimes speculated that the priests might have told Alexander he was a son of Ammon Zeus. It is supposed that the ceremonial horns he took to wearing afterwards were a mark of this. In some countries he conquered, he was remembered as a horned man. In the Quran, he appeared as Dul Karnayan, which means the two-horned one. But according to the secret history, these horns are the horns of a hunter we have already met, and the two fiercely loving friends, Gilgamesh and Enkidu, separated by the untimely death of Enkidu, were reunited when they reincarnated as Alexander and Aristotle. At the age of only 33, Alexander ignored warnings by the astrologers of Babylon not to enter their city gates. 2 weeks later, he died of fever. It would soon become apparent that Alexander's empire had been held together only by his personal magnetism. Excuse me. Buddhism emerged as the first proselytizing missionary religion in about 200 BC. Before then, the religion you believed in was determined by your race or tribe. Now the human condition was changing. For the uninitiated, the spirit worlds were a fading vision, leaving faint traces hard to be certain of, difficult to discern. Inspired by Pythagoras, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, people were developing a capacity for deductive and inductive thought. They were able to weigh up arguments on either side. In 140 BC, Rome was the capital of the world and a vortex of ideas. A citizen might have very different belief systems to choose from: the official cult of the planetary gods, the Neo-Egyptian worship of Serapis, Epicureanism, Stoicism, the philosophy of the Peripatetics, and the Persian cult of Mithraism. Buddhist monks and Indian Brahmins had certainly reached Alexandria. Okay, and then we have another picture. Virgil from a painting by the Swiss-born artist Henri Fuseli. Virgil was the great initiate poet of the founding and destiny of Rome. Aeneid, I don't know how to pronounce that. It's Aeneid. I anyway, that word 748 through 51 gives expression to the doctrine of reincarnation and the spirit's desire to return to the body when 1,000 years comes round. Okay, and here is that picture. Obviously just a tracing of that from the painting. Okay. These are long chapters. These two are pretty long chapters tonight. I don't know if I'll make it through the second one. I'm going to do my best, though. I definitely need to drink a lot more water, though. For the first time in history, choosing one of these belief systems could be a matter of personal choice. Individuals might choose in proportion to the evidence, or they might choose what they wanted to believe. With the rise to dominance of the Roman Empire, therefore, we reach the age of inauthentic faith, with a cynicism and conscious cultivation of sensibility that was entirely new. When we think of Rome, we picture sophistication and grandeur, but also paranoia. If we compare the Greece of Pericles with the Rome of the Caesars, we see in the latter the same kind of overbearing pomp, elaborate, awesome rituals of smoke, incense, and clashing cymbals that had earlier been used to hypnotize the peoples into obedience to Baal. Now it was used to hypnotize people into believing that various strange and egomaniacal members of the ruling elite were in fact gods. The Caesars forced the mystery schools to initiate them. In the process, they discovered the ancient initiatic teachings regarding the sun god. Julius Caesar eradicated the Druids because of their teaching of the sun mysteries, that the sun god was soon to return to earth. Similarly, Augustus banned astrology not because he disbelieved in it, but because he was anxious about what astrologers could see written in the sky. If the people could not read the signs of the time, he could perhaps get away with representing himself as the sun god. Because he had been initiated, Caligula knew how to communicate with the spirits of the moon in his dreams, but because he had gained initiation by force and without proper preparation, he could not properly identify them. Caligula would refer to Jupiter, Hercules, Dionysus, and Apollo as his brother gods, sometimes appearing in fancy dress to look like them. Nero's reign of madness reached a climax when he realized he was not, after all, the sun god. He would rather burn the whole world to the ground than let another greater individual live. The Golden Ass of Apelles is one of the great initiatic works of the Roman period. It contains a wonderful story concerning the life of the spirit. Cupid and Psyche carries familiar and fairly conventional warnings about the dangers of curiosity, but it also has an esoteric and historical level of meaning. Psyche is a beautiful, innocent young girl. Cupid falls in love with her and sends messengers asking her to come to him in his hilltop palace at night. She is to make love to a god, but there is one condition. Their love-making must take place in total darkness. Psyche must take it on trust that she is enjoying the love of a god. Her elder sister is envious, though. She taunts her and tells her that it is not a beautiful boy god she is making love to, but a hideous giant serpent. One night, Psyche can resist no longer, and while Cupid is in his postcoital slumber, she holds an oil lamp over him. She is delighted to discover the gloriously beautiful young god, but at that moment, a drop of oil, burning oil, falls on him and wakes him. Psyche is banished from his presence forever. The double meaning in this story is this: the god really is a hideous serpent. This is the history of the Nephilim, of the entry into the human condition of the serpent of animal desire, but told from the human point of view. The mystery schools were falling into decay. As we have seen, excavations of the entrance to the underworld at Baia in southern Italy revealed secret passageways and trapdoors used to help convince the candidates that they were having supernatural experiences. In the smoky, druggy darkness, priests dressed up as gods would loom out of the darkness over candidates heavily drugged with hallucinogens. Robert Temple has reconstructed the initiation ceremonies of this late decadent phase. They were largely a matter of scary special effects, even including puppets, like a ghost train today. The difference was that at the end of your initiation, when you re-emerged into daylight, the priests quizzed you, and unless you believed in their illusions without the slightest sliver of doubt, they killed you. Okay. We have another picture. The Golden Ass, which contains the story of Cupid and Psyche, is a beautiful book, written by an initiate in a larky way that anticipates Rabelais, but it is also a consciously literary production. The colossal and monolithic sincerity of the ancient mystery schools is no more. Okay, I'll show you the picture that goes with it. There we have it. Cupid. I've never heard anything about Cupid being a serpent. That's an interesting thing. Okay, we're almost done with this first chapter. We've got just a little over one page left. The sincere men of Rome, the true initiates, withdrew into yet more shadowy schools that operated independently of the official cult. Stoicism became the outward expression of the initiatic impulse of the age, the growing point of intellectual and spiritual evolution. Cicero and Seneca, both deeply involved with Stoicism, tried to temper the egomania of their political masters. They tried to argue that all men were born brothers and that the slaves should be set free. Cicero was an urbane and sophisticated man and one of the great forces for reform in the Roman Empire. He looked upon his initiation at Eleusis as the great formative experience of his life. It had taught him, he said, quote, to live joyfully and to die hopefully, end quote. If Cicero looked askance at the plebs' vain and superstitious beliefs in venal gods, he was also tolerant of them. He held that even the most ridiculous of the myths could be interpreted in an allegorical way. In The Nature of the Gods, he gives a passionate exposition of the Stoic idea of the moving spirit of the universe, the guiding force that makes plants seek nourishment in the earth, gives animals sense, motion, and an instinct to go after what is good for them that is also akin to reason. This same moving spirit of the cosmos gives people reason itself and a higher intelligence to the gods themselves, quote unquote. These gods should not really be imagined as having bodies like our own, quote, but are clothed in the most ethereal and beautiful forms, end quote. He writes too that we can see their higher inward purpose in the movements of the stars and planets, quote unquote. When Rome's political mechanicians finally caught up with Cicero, he stoically bared his neck to the centurion's sword. Seneca also believed in this cosmic sympathy of the Stoics and the ability of the adepts to manipulate this sympathy for their own ends. His play, Medea, probably quotes real magical formulae used by the black magicians of the day. Medea is portrayed as being able to direct her power of concentrated hatred so strongly that she can change the position of the stars. In this age of disenchantment, it first became possible to consider that the gods might not exist. Among the intellectual elite, the Epicureans were formulating the first materialistic and atheistic philosophies. What remained was belief in the lowest levels of spirits, the spirits of the dead and demons. If you read literature of the time, or if you read literature of the time, such as the Gospel of the New Testament, you see they record that the world was experiencing an epidemic of demons. While the intellectual elite toyed with atheism, the people dabbled in atavistic forms of occultism that made use of the fact that demons and other low forms of spirit life are attracted by the fumes from blood sacrifices. The high priest of the Jerusalem temple wore little bells attached to his robes so that the goblins that lived in the shadows would hear him coming and hide their hideous shapes. The temple needed a vast, complex drainage system to cope with the thousands of gallons of sacrificial blood that flowed through it every day. All around the world, increasingly desperate measures were taken. Plutarch wrote against human sacrifice in a way that implies it was common. In South America, in a bizarre parody, a black magician was being nailed to a cross. And that is actually the end of the chapter. And we are coming up on a break in 2 minutes anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and take a break, drink a bunch of water, and go get some more. And we'll come back and dive into chapter 15. So I will see you back here in a few minutes. Prepare to die. All right, let's go ahead and get back into it and start up this next chapter. So we're up to chapter 15. The sun god returns the two Jesus children. The cosmic mission. Crucifixion in South America. The mystic marriage of Mary Magdalene. Well, this should be an interesting chapter. I'm going to settle back in and kick my feet up here. Okay. So, in Palestine, a great turning point in the history of the world had been reached. Because the gods were no longer experienced as out there in the material world, it was necessary for the sun god, the Word, capital W Word, to descend to earth. As we are about to see, his mission was to plant in the human skull the seeds of an interior life that would become the new arena of spiritual experience. This planting would give rise to the sense we all have today that we each have inside an inner space. The cosmic plan had been that human spirits would attain individuality, should be able to think freely, to experience free will, and to choose who to love. To create the conditions for this, matter became denser until each individual spirit was finally isolated inside its own skull. Human thought and will was then no longer wholly controlled by gods, angels, and spirits, as it had been 1,000 years earlier at the siege of Troy. However, there were dangers in this development. Not only might humanity become altogether cut off from the spirit world, there was a danger, too, that humans would become completely cut off from one another. Now, all it took was a cell phone to do that. This was the great crisis. People no longer felt like spiritual beings because the human spirit was in danger of being snuffed out altogether. The love that bound tribes and families, an instinctive psychic blood love like the one which binds packs of wolves, was weakened in the newly hardened skulls in the new towns and cities. Tracing the development toward a sense of individual identity, we have touched on Mosaic law, a rule for communal living strictly enforced, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. We have touched, too, on the obligation to feel compassion for all living things taught by the Buddha. We saw in both traditions the beginnings of moral obligation as a path of individual discipline and development. Now the Stoics of Rome gave the individual legal and political status in the form of rights and duties. The irony then was that just as individual human identity was formed, the sense that life was worth living was largely lost. The bloodbaths in the Colosseum showed no notion of the value, let alone the sanctity, of individual human life. Jesus ben Pandira, the leader of the Essenes, might preach purity and universal compassion, but from a point of view of a movement to withdraw from the world altogether. Stoics might teach responsibility, but to them this was a duty without joy. Quote, "Never let the future disturb you," the Stoic emperor Marcus Aurelius would offer as a philosophy of life. "You will meet it, if you have to, with the same weapons of reason which arm you today against the present." End quote. These words are full of weariness. Humanity felt itself dragged along by a tide of suffering. We may imagine how people long to hear someone say, quote, "Come with me, ye that are heavy laden, I will give you rest." End quote. We saw the candidate for initiation being shown the green wheat ear in the inner sanctum of Eleusis and taught to look forward to the seed time, quote unquote. In the inner sanctum of the great Egyptian temples, candidates for initiation had been shown Isis suckling the infant Horus. This second Horus, this Horus to come, would be a new king of the gods, bringing a new dispensation. He was called he was called the Good Shepherd, the Lamb of God, the Book of Life, and the Truth and the Life. Isaiah had told his people to make straight the ways of the Lord. He promised their sins would be washed away as he envisioned the coming of the Messiah. In the fourth eclogue, I've never seen that word before in my life. Eclogue? Eclogue. In the fourth eclogue, the Roman initiate poet Virgil predicted the coming of the man god, the Savior. Quote, "The golden age will return as its firstborn descends from on high," he wrote. "All the stains of our past wickedness will be washed away." End quote. In fact, the life of Christ Jesus, as it has come down to us, might look like a patchwork of events in the lives of those who came before him. Born to a carpenter and a virgin, like Krishna, born on December 25th, like Mithra, heralded by a star in the east, like Horus, walking on water and feeding the 5,000 from a small basket, like Buddha, performing healing miracles, like Pythagoras, raising from the dead, like Elisha, executed on a tree like Adonis, ascending to heaven like Hercules, Enoch, and Elijah. It is hard to find any act or saying ascribed to the Jesus of the Gospels that had not been foreshadowed in some way. Anyone minded to think corrosively will decide to see this as evidence that his life was a fiction. But in the secret history, this is a universal movement of convergence as the whole cosmos strained to give birth to the new sun god. And that's S-U-N. Looking at the great imaginative image of the Nativity as it has been depicted in history's greatest art, and decoding it according to the secret doctrine, we can see how the whole secret history of the world had been leading up to this point. In Mary, we should sense the presence of Isis. When the sun arose in the constellation of Pisces, the sign of Jesus, the constellation on the opposite horizon was Virgo, the Virgin. In Joseph, the patriarch, carrying a crooked staff, we see Osiris, his staff symbolizing the third eye. The cave in which Jesus Christ is often represented as being born is the bony skull in which a new miracle of consciousness is about to be ignited. The baby in the manger has the luminous vegetative body of Krishna. The ox and the ass represent the two ages that have led to the new age of Pisces, the age of Taurus and Aries. the ages of Taurus and Aries. The star that guides the Magi is the spirit of Zarathustra, the golden star. One of the Magi is Pythagoras reincarnated, and the Magi have been initiated by the prophet Daniel. The angel who announces the birth to the shepherds is the spirit of the Buddha. The secret tradition sometimes has a propensity to see how things are with a childlike simplicity. The two Gospels with infancy narratives, Luke and Matthew, give very different, indeed inconsistent accounts, starting with the different genealogies ascribed to Jesus, the time and place of the births, and the visit by the shepherds in Luke and by the Magi in Matthew. This is a distinction rigidly maintained in the art of the Middle Ages that has since been lost. While it may be glossed over in church, academic theologians accept that where these accounts conflict, at least one must be false. Perhaps an uncomfortable conclusion for anyone believing that Scripture is divinely inspired. In the secret tradition, on the other hand, there is no problem because these two narratives describe the infancies of two Jesus children. These boys had a mysterious kinship. They were not twins, though they looked almost identical. In the Gnostic text, the Pistis Sophia, contemporary with the canonical books of the New Testament, and considered by some scholars to have equal claim to authenticity, there is a strange story concerning these two children. Mary sees a boy who looks so exactly like him that she naturally takes him to be her son, but then this boy disconcerts her by asking to see her son Jesus. Fearing that this must be some sort of demon, she ties the boy to the bed, then goes out into the fields looking for Joseph and Jesus. She finds them erecting vine poles. The three of them go back to the house. The boys gaze at each other, amazed, and embrace. The secret tradition that traces the subtle, complex process by which human form and human consciousness was put together has a parallel in its tracing of the extremely complex process by which the incarnation of the Word, capital W, was brought about. In this account, it was necessary for one of the two Jesus children who carried the spirit of Krishna to sacrifice his individual identity in some mysterious way for the sake of the other. The spiritual economy of the cosmos required him to do this so that the boy who survived would in time be ready to receive the Christ spirit at the baptism. As the Pistis Sophia says, quote, "Ye became one and the same being," end quote. This tradition of the two Jesus children was maintained by the secret societies and can be seen on the north portal at Chartres in the apse mosaic of San Miniato outside Florence, and in the paintings of many initiates, including Borgonon, Raphael, Leonardo, and Veronese. I know I'm butchering some of those. We have a picture. The caption is "The Leonardo Cartoon in the National Gallery, London." The esoteric dimension to this work is conveyed by the swirling, star-spangled light that suggests the world between the worlds. It depicts the two Jesus children. Similarly, in the London version of the Virgin of the Rocks, nearby, a later hand than Leonardo's has added the elongated form of the cross that in Christian art is John the Baptist's distinctive insignia. Okay, so let me bring up that picture with the two Jesus children. And there you have it. And I don't know, is this supposed to be Mary and this is Joseph, or who is this on this side? It looks like another woman just by the facial features to me. I don't know. Their legs are crossing over one another. I don't know. Okay. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was the God. Oh, this is a quote, of course. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were made by him, and the light shineth in darkness, and darkness comprehended it not. He was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not. End quote. The author of the Gospel of St. John is here comparing the creation of the cosmos by the Word with the mission of Jesus Christ, the incarnated Word. John presents this second mission as a sort of second creation. At a time when the material universe had become so dense that it was all but impossible for the gods to manifest themselves on the earth's surface, the sun god descended. S-U-N. His mission was to plant a seed. This spiritualizing seed would grow to provide the space that would be the new arena in which the gods could manifest themselves. The crucial point here, usually overlooked outside the secret tradition, is this: Jesus Christ created the interior life. We have seen an intimation of the interior life in the still, small voice heard by Elijah. Similarly, in Jeremiah, the Lord says, quote, I will put my hand in the inward parts, and in their heart I will write it. End quote. But the planting of the sun seed just over 2,000 years ago was the decisive event in the process which has led to each of us experiencing inside of ourselves a cosmos of infinite size and variety. Okay, and then we have another caption and another picture. So the caption is Romulus and Remus, the story of the two Jesus boys, is in effect a sanctified version of the story of Romulus and Remus, in which one brother murders the other in order for him to serve as the foundation sacrifice of the eternal city. Great buildings and cities were founded on sacrifices in ancient times, and this is undoubtedly what the myth of Remus killed and buried in a ditch refers to. In the case of the two Jesus boys, one could be said to sacrifice himself for the sake of the New Jerusalem. And I've seen this picture before, and you probably have as well. Romulus and Remus suckling from the wolf, I believe. They were lost in the woods or abandoned in the woods or something like that. And a wolf adopted them. Okay. I don't remember all the details, but that's what I remember of it. We also have a sense that others have infinity inside them. Over many hundreds of years, the conditions had been coming together which would make possible a sense of individual identity, what we today sometimes call the ego. But without the intervention of the sun god, the ego would have been a small, hard, self-centered point, operating in isolation, intent only on its own immediate gratification, open to no outside interests other than the very lowest. It's not far from the truth now. Every human being would have been at war with every other human being. No individual would have any sense at all of any other as an independent center of consciousness. When his parents took Jesus to the temple, at the time of the disappearance of his kindred spirit, he showed himself very wise. What passed into him from the other Jesus was the ability to read minds, to see deep into other people's souls, to see how they related to the spirit worlds, and to know what to do or say to make things right for them. He felt other people's pain as his own. He was experiencing something, the gift of empathy, which no one had ever felt before. Once an individual or small group develops a new faculty, a new mode of consciousness, it often spreads around the world with remarkable speed. Jesus Christ introduced a new kind of love, a gracious love based on the gift of empathy. An individual would be free to transcend the bonds of his or her isolated existence to share in what was taking place in another person's innermost nature. Love BC had been tribal or familial. Now individuals were able to rise above blood ties and to choose freely who to love. It is this that Jesus meant when, in Mark 3:32, he appeared to deny the importance of his own mother to him, and when in Matthew 10, chapter 10, verse 37 through 8 through 38, he said, quote, "He that loveth father and mother more than me is not worthy of me." End quote. Esoteric teaching is above all about loving in the right way. It says that when you cooperate with the gracious forces that form the cosmos, the force flows through you in such a way that you may become conscious of it. This process is called thaumaturgy or divine magic. Whether at this level or at the level of little nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and love, quote unquote, or the little way of Saint Teresa of Lisieux, Lisieux, Lisieux. It's something French, I'm sure. The way of self-denial and acts of charity in small things. The new Christian perspective was focused on the inner life. If we compare earlier moral codes, such as the Law of Moses, or the even older Code of Hammurabi with the Sermon on the Mount, it is clear that they were only rules to regulate behavior in the outer world. Do not worship idols, steal, murder, commit adultery, etc. The moral teaching in the Gospels, on the other hand, is directed toward inner states. Quote, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, they that mourn, the meek, the pure in heart," end quote. When Jesus Christ said, quote, "But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart," end quote, he was saying something no one had ever said before, that our innermost thoughts are as real as physical objects. What I think privately has a direct effect on the history of the cosmos. In an idealist universe, intention is of course much more important than in a materialist universe. In an idealist universe, if two people perform exactly the same action in exactly the same circumstances, but one in a good-hearted way and the other not, the consequences are very different. In some mysterious way, the state of our soul informs the results of our deeds, just as the elevated state of the soul of a great painter informs his paintings. In esoteric interpretation of Greek myths, ambrosia, the food of the gods, is human love. Without it, gods fade away and their power to help us is diminished. In esoteric and mystic Christianity, angels are attracted to us if we ask for their help, but if we fail to do so, they fall into a twilight vegetative state, and the phantoms and the demons that insinuate themselves around our lower beings work on us instead. We can, of course, resist the demons and train our baser animal selves in the same way that we train a dog, by a process of repetition. In esoteric teaching, it is said that daily repetition of a meditative exercise for 21 days is needed to effect a deep-seated change in our habits. But there is a yet deeper part of our animal selves which lies completely below the threshold of consciousness and is inaccessible to it. We cannot transform this part by the exercise of free will, no matter how persistent, because the corruption of our animal selves has seeped down into our vegetable and mineral selves. In order to purify and transform these parts of ourselves, we need supernatural help. The mission of the sun god, S-U-N, then was to sink right down into deepest matter, introducing his transforming spiritual influence. The sun god has the ability to reach right down into the most material part of humanity, which is why it was written, quote, "None of his bones shall be broken," end quote. The 12-petaled lotus radiates outward from the region of the heart and envelops those we choose to love. It is also an organ of perception. What I truly love will open itself up to me and reveal its secrets. Enveloping someone in love in this way is an exercise of the imagination. Of course, imagination is not to be confused here with fantasy. It is a true perception of a higher reality, and the organ of this in both East and West is the heart chakra. This is what is being referred to on the road to Emmaus, where disciples who have just recognized who it was they have just encountered say to themselves, quote, "Did our hearts not burn within us while he talked to us on the road?" End quote. When the heart chakra blossoms and shines, we may perceive the outworld in a supernatural way. A loving heart can give me conscious experience of the heart of the cosmos, of the loving intelligence that lives beyond the outworld and controls it. Quote, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." End quote. Love works on the will as well as powers of perception. When we really love someone, we are willing to do anything for them. This is why the heart chakra blossoms when love moves me to act according to my conscience. I am not then acting wearily like Marcus Aurelius. I am not acting in a cold, unenthusiastic, or inauthentic way. I am not doing my duty while part of me resents it. I am acting out of love and devotion. Okay, we have another picture and a fairly long quotation or citation, not citation, caption. Um, the phase, I'm sorry, the phrase "son of God," the phrase "son of man" is problematic to exoteric theologians because it seems to refer to both a state of mind and to Jesus Christ himself. In esoteric thought, this is resolved because the individual who has evolved to the stage of enlightenment that Jesus Christ made possible will, as a result, become aware of his or her higher self or divine self. In Christian iconography, this evolution is commonly symbolized by a child carried on the shoulder. For example, in the story of St. Christopher, who carried the Christ child on his shoulders. In the Kabbalah, these two same dimensions of meaning are contained in the three-pronged letter Shin. Okay, so the picture, and I'm going to have to blow this one up because it's pretty small. So St. Christopher with Jesus the Christ on his shoulder. Carrying the holy hand grenade. Look at that. Haha. Um, crossing a river, a sea, something. Definitely feet are in the water. There's the fish. Interesting. Okay, where are we at here? We're just coming up on halfway through this chapter. Initiation forges a new form of consciousness. It revives ways of being conscious of the spirit worlds that are common in the earlier stages of human evolution, but now with new elements. The initiations of Pythagoras that set the tone for the ages of the ascendancy of Greece and Rome, for example, had been concerned with achieving an alternative state of consciousness involving free communication with the spirit worlds that had been an everyday occurrence for, say, Gilgamesh or Achilles, but with a crucial difference. Initiates of the school of Pythagoras were able to think about their spiritual experiences in a considered conceptual way that would have been impossible for Achilles or Gilgamesh. "400 years later, the initiations of Jesus Christ introduced a new element, opening up dizzying new dimensions in love. In order to understand the momentous events described in the Gospels better, we must now look at Jesus' involvement with the mystery schools. I was wondering when he was going to get around to that. We are trespassing on closely guarded academic territory here. Controversial findings, now widely accepted by biblical scholars, but which have not yet filtered down to the wider congregation, show that there are some early Christian texts rediscovered in Palestine in the 1950s which contain versions of sayings of Jesus that are likely to be closer to the originals than the versions contained in the four Gospels. Probably talking about the Nag Hammadi texts, I would guess. And some of these texts contain sayings which don't appear in the Gospels at all. And the fact that texts like the Gospel of St. Thomas contain truer versions of the biblical sayings is a reason for believing that the entirely non-biblical sayings these texts contain may be authentic. This is important for our history because some of them relate to the secret teachings. The Gospels hint that Jesus gives favored followers teachings not for public dissemination. When Jesus warns against casting pearls before swine, he seems to be talking of holding some sacred truths back from the multitude. More explicitly, in Mark chapter 4, verse 11, has Jesus say, quote, "The secret of the kingdom of God is given to you, but to those who are outside everything comes in parables," end quote. A more striking and revealing account of Jesus' involvement in secret teaching is to be found in a letter written in the 2nd century by Clement, Bishop of Alexandria. This text was discovered in 1959 in the stacks of the library of the Mar Saba Monastery near Jerusalem by Dr. Morton Smith, professor of ancient history at Columbia University. Quote, Mark then, during Peter's stay in Rome, wrote an account of the Lord's doings, not, however, declaring all of them, nor yet hinting at the secret ones, but selecting those he thought most useful for increasing the faith of those who were being instructed. But when Peter died as a martyr, Mark came over to Alexandria, bringing his own notes and those of Peter, from which he transferred to his former book the things suitable to whatever makes for progress toward knowledge, and in this way he composed a more spiritual gospel for use of those who were being perfected, and dying he left his composition to the church in Alexandria, where it is still carefully guarded. End quote. The spirit of Alexandria, the spirit, where the hell did I get spirit? The Bishop of Alexandria then quotes from this more spiritual, quote unquote, version of Mark's gospel. So we have a long quote here. And they came to Bethany, and a certain woman whose brother had died was there. And coming, she prostrated herself before Jesus and said to him, Son of David, have mercy on me. But the disciples rebuked her. And Jesus, being angered, went off with her into the garden where the tomb was. And straightway, going in where the youth was, he stretched forth his hand, and seizing his hand, raised him. But the youth, looking upon him, loved him, and began to beseech him that he might be with him. And after 6 days Jesus told him what to do, and in the evening the youth came to him, wearing a linen cloth over his naked body, and he remained with him that night, for Jesus taught him the mystery of the kingdom of God. And then, arising, he returned to the other side of the Jordan. End quote. That could be interpreted a few different ways. Okay, so we have now a picture of the Last Supper, and the caption is The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. It has been suggested that this painting alludes to suppressed secret doctrines regarding the feminine role in Christianity. We shall see shortly that this is true, though not in the way proposed by the Da Vinci Code, the book by, what's it? what's his name? Brown. I can't I can't think of his first name right now. Um, Completely blanking on his first name. But here is the Last Supper. And I do kind of see what they were talking about in the Da Vinci Code, um, because this person here does look somewhat feminine compared to the rest. But it could just be a young boy too, or a young man that doesn't have a beard. Um, but anyway, you interpret it as you will. Okay. To modern sensibility, this story, which appears to be a more detailed version of the story of the raising of Lazarus in John's Gospel, might seem to describe a homosexual liaison, but as we shall see, as we come to examine the nature of initiation ceremonies more clearly, it is certainly a mystery school initiation that Mark alludes to here. Or it could have been a homosexual liaison. um, oh, that would piss some people off, wouldn't it? The raising of Lazarus from the dead has traditionally been seen as an encoded account of initiation. The clues are there. Lazarus dies, quote unquote, for 3 days, and when Jesus Christ raises him, he uses the phrase, Lazarus come forth, that the Hierophants had used in the Great Pyramid when, after 3 days, they stretched forth a hand to raise the candidate from the open tomb in the king's chamber. What was the initiation of Lazarus like from Lazarus's point of view? What was the alternative form of consciousness it conferred? Readers may be surprised to learn that we know the answer to these questions, because in the secret history, the man called Lazarus in the Gospel of John later wrote the Revelation of St. John the Divine. According to the secret doctrine, the opening of the seven seals and the great visionary events that follow that are described in Revelation refer to the revivifying of the seven chakras. Unpalatable, unpalatable though some may find it, the fact of the matter is that the teachings of Jesus Christ are steeped in the ancient and secret philosophy, and this is equally true of his sayings recorded in the Bible it as it is of the newly discovered sayings. I have led up to this point gently, though those of us brought up as Christians may find it easier to recognize these things in alien cultures, partly, no doubt, because of the greater focus that distance brings, but also because we are less acutely aware of treading on sacred ground. Christianity's most sacred texts are deeply occult. The meek shall inherit the earth. Faith moves mountains. Ask and it shall be given. There is deliberate obfuscation by church leaders when it comes to these and other key tenets of the Christian faith. Modern liberal Christianity has tried to accommodate science by playing down its occult dimensions, but the sayings from the Sermon on the Mount listed above are descriptions of how the supernatural operates in the universe. Not only are they paradoxical and mysterious, not only are they irrational, not only do they describe what is highly unlikely according to the laws of probability, they describe the universe behaving in a way which would be completely impossible if science described everything there is. For the meek will certainly not inherit the earth, and prayers will not be answered by the forces that science describes. Neither virtue nor faith will be rewarded unless some supernatural agency makes them so. The New Testament is full of occult and esoteric teaching, some of it explicitly stated. The problem is that we have been educated to be blind to it, but the text quite clearly says that John the Baptist is Elijah come again, that is, reincarnated. There is magic, too. The late Hugh Schoenfield, Morton Smith, and other academic experts have shown that Jesus' miracles, particularly in the form of words he uses, are based on pre-existing magic papyri in Greek, Egyptian, and Aramaic. When in John's Gospel, Jesus Christ is described as using spittle to make a paste to apply to the eyes of a blind man. This is not a purely godly action in the sense of an unmediated influx of spirit, but a manipulation of matter in order to influence or control spirit. Okay, we have another picture, and the caption for it: Apollonius of Tyana, of the many itinerant wonder workers and healers contemporary with Jesus Christ, the one who made the greatest impression on contemporary chroniclers was Apollonius. This Pythagorean from Cappadocia let his hair grow long, wore only linen clothes and shoes of bark. He cast out demons and performed many healing miracles, but perhaps the most interesting parallel to Jesus Christ is his insistence that the day of blood sacrifice was over. We should approach God, he said, only with the noblest faculty with which we are blessed, namely intelligence. Okay, so the picture of Apollonius of Tyana, holding in his hand some sort of spherical object. I'm not sure quite what that's supposed to be. Interesting. This is that supposed to be a sphinx? It looks like the body of a lion, the torso of a person with wings, so I would think that's a sphinx. And then this looks like some depiction of a dragon, maybe? They did talk about the dragons. Okay. Again, it is no denigration of Jesus Christ to point this out. One must not view these things anachronistically. In terms of the philosophy and theology of the day, this sort of divine magic or thaumaturgy was not only respectable, it was the highest activity to which a human being could aspire. If you politely turn a blind eye to the supernatural content of the story of Jesus Christ and the rise of Christianity, you still have to accept that something extraordinary happened which needs explanation. Because whether or not anything miraculous happened in that obscure corner of the Near East in the early years of the first century, its effect on the history of the world is unparalleled in its breadth and depth. It gave rise to the civilization we now enjoy, a civilization of unprecedented freedom, prosperity for all, richness of culture, scientific advance. Before the time of Jesus Christ, there was very little sense of the importance of the individual, of the sanctity of individual life, the transcendental power of one individual's freely chosen love for another. Of course, some of these ideas were foreshadowed by Krishna, Isaiah, the Buddha, Pythagoras, Lao Tzu. But what was unique to Christianity, the mustard seed, quote unquote, planted by Jesus Christ, was the idea of the interior life. With Jesus Christ, not only did the individual begin to experience the sense we all have now that parallel to the limitless, infinitely various, cosmos out there, we each have indeed, man, I'm getting tired. We each have inside us a cosmos which is equally rich and limitless. But Jesus Christ also introduced the sense that each of us now has of a personal narrative history that weaves in and out of the general history. Each of us may fall as humanity as a whole has fallen. Each of us experiences crisis of doubt and finds individual personal redemption, very different from the tribal consciousness of earlier generations of Jews or the city-state consciousness of the Greeks. The ministry of Jesus Christ lasted just 3 years, from the baptism to Good Friday on 3 April AD 3, when at the place of the skulls, Golgotha, the sun god was nailed on the cross of matter. Then at the transfiguration, the sun god began to transform that matter to spiritualize it. We have seen how, in the mystery schools from Zarathustra to Lazarus, candidates had undergone a 3-day mystical death and rebirth. The candidate was put in a deep, death-like trance for 3 days, during which his spirit traveled the spirit worlds, bringing back knowledge and power to the material world. The death, then, was a real event, but on the spiritual plane. What happened was, with the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, was that for the first time this process of initiation occurred as a historical event on the material plane. Okay, so we have another picture, a caption, and another picture. So, the resurrection, part of the Isenheim altarpiece by Matthias Grunwald, is a cosmic vision of Jesus Christ as the sun god. Grunwald depicted what the church father Tertullian, drawing from the Greek mystery tradition, called the luminous seed, the Aegoides. Planted in the earth, it now arose as a luminous star-like body, a body of light rays. When the disciples on the road to Emmaus failed to recognize Christ, it was because they were encountering his Aegoidean body. Augodian. Augoeidean. In case you wanted to know that and you know how to pronounce it properly. Okay, so there's our first picture. It looks like that's a leg down here. So is this supposed to be the body, and then this is him rising up out of it? Okay, then the next one is the cross in the middle of the 4 cherubim who symbolize the 4 elements. As we have seen, the 4 elements working from the constellations at the 4 corners of the cosmos work together to hold the material world in place. Jesus Christ is here represented in his cosmic role as 5th element, the sun god who comes to earth to spiritualize the 4 elements and dissolve matter. There we go with that. So the 4 elements. Surrounding the 5th. Okay. All right. We are getting close to the end. We have a little over 3 pages of actual text and a few more pictures. And a good thing, because my voice is starting to go. The shadow side of this great event is contained in the story of Christ's journey into hell. This happened immediately after his death on the cross. It is a story which has fallen into desuetude? I don't know that word. I've never seen it. It's Desuetude. I'm going to have to look that one up. Part of the process by which we have lost a sense of the spiritual dimension of the cosmos. Initiation is always concerned as much with lighting the way of the journey after death as with this life's journey. In the centuries before Jesus Christ, humanity's sense of the afterlife had shrunk to an anticipation of a dreary half-life of shades in the sublunar realm, Sheol. And after death and after And after death, human spirits lost consciousness as they started their ascent through the higher heavenly spheres. The result was that in their next reincarnation, these spirits returned with no intimations of the journey. By descending into hell, Jesus Christ was following in the footsteps of Osiris. He was lighting up a way through the underworld that the dead could follow. The living and dead would have to walk together if the great cosmic mission, the work, was to be completed. According to esoteric doctrine, the whole history of the world can be summed up as follows. There was a golden age when earth and sun were united, and the sun gave the earth form. The sun then separated from the earth, causing it to materialize and become colder. The god of the sun returned to infuse his spirit in the earth, so that the whole cosmos will eventually dematerialize and again become spiritualized. This is the cosmic vision of the mission of Jesus Christ, which inspired the early Christians. The work which helped shape the great churches of the Middle Ages and the art of the Renaissance, it has been lost to modern exoteric Christianity. Whew. Okay, so we have another picture, and the caption for that is "The Harrowing of Hell" by Andrea Mantegna. In 1 Peter chapter 6, verses 18 through 19, he also went to the spirits in prison. The gospel was also preached to those that are dead. Following what St. Paul termed Jesus Christ's descent into the lower parts of the earth, spirits had him as their guide to light the way. So here is that picture. So is this is supposed to be him pulling some spirits up from a lower level to a higher level, guiding this crew here. It looks like a demon blowing a horn. And some kind of weird creature here. And the cross and an arch above all of that. Okay. If the death of Jesus Christ was meant to happen on a cosmological level, we should still ask ourselves what made it happen on a historical level. What were the immediate causes of the crucifixion? Although Jesus Christ instructed Lazarus in private, his rebirth and his being called forth to a new life was a public event. It did not happen like all previous initiations within the closely guarded confines of a mystery school, and neither was Jesus Christ a hierophant of one of the state-sponsored mystery schools. As a result, Jesus Christ made deadly enemies of the Sadducees, who controlled the dissemination of initiatic knowledge on behalf of the ruling elite. The act of initiating Lazarus in public was a revolutionary one, signaling that the tie that bound initiates to the ruling elite was being broken. It was the beginning of the end of the mystery schools, and it prepared the way for the secret societies. Jesus Christ also posed a threat to the Roman elite. The soldiers who draped him in a purple cloak and placed a crown of thorns on his head had no other king, no other god than Caesar. They mocked Jesus Christ by draping on him the purple cloak that was worn as a sign of initiation in the Adonis mysteries. The crown of thorns was a satire on the wreath bestowed when a candidate achieved initiation in the mysteries of Eleusis. The Caesars were the great occult enemy of Jesus Christ. What is less well known is that another enemy was at work on the other side of the world. There are initiate There an initiate wielded a blacker, more powerful magic than that wrought by the Caesars. This magician had, according to Rudolf Steiner, worked to build up his supernatural powers over several incarnations, and he now threatened to pervert the whole course of history. He had achieved this power on the back of multiple human sacrifices. Jose Ortega y Gasset, the Spanish philosopher, talks of the release of spirits that the spilling of blood brings. Blood is a frightening mystery, he says. It carries life, and when it is spilled and the ground stained, the whole landscape is maddened and excited. Occultists know that humans can be killed in a particular way so that the human spirit is harnessed. We saw how great initiates like Elijah fashion their own vegetable and animal selves in such a way that they can become chariots with which to travel through the spiritual worlds. In occult circles, it is also known that black magicians can use the souls and spirits of others, their sacrificial victims, as chariots. The great enemy, a magician, was therefore able to control people beyond the grave. By sacrificing great numbers of victims, he created an army for himself in the spirit worlds. At the turn of the millennium, a sun hero was sent to Earth to oppose him. He was called Huitzilopochtli. That's a tough one. As we know from the Codex Florentine of Sahagun, one of the few scraps to survive the conquistadors, like earlier sun heroes, his birth was prophesied. He was born to a virgin mother, and after his birth, the forces of evil conspired to kill him. Okay, and then we have a picture. Mary Magdalene, esoteric thought, is essentially reincarnational. It is not primarily concerned with spirits passed on through genes. Jesus Christ came to do away with bloodlines as a way of transmitting clairvoyance and wisdom. Love was to be freely chosen rather than instinctual and tribal. The notion of Jesus marrying Mary Magdalene and having children is therefore irrelevant to his mission. Esoteric literature and the teachings of the schools refer rather to a mystic marriage of the sun and the moon, the Hieros Gamos, which we will return to in a later chapter. Okay, and that I will show you that picture. And then, so, yeah, I have nothing to say about that picture. I'm just going to move on. We're almost done. But Huitzilopochtli survived the early attempts on his life, and after many trials, he waged a 3-year magical war against the black magician. Finally, he succeeded in crucifying him. When Jesus Christ was crucified, a huge power to spiritualize the earth was unleashed. When simultaneously the great black magician of the South Americas was crucified, a vortex opened that would draw into itself the great currents of world history, the extremes of both good and evil. The Gospel of Philip contains intriguing hints about Jesus Christ's relationship with Mary Magdalene. Quote, Jesus loved her more than all the disciples and used to kiss her often on, end quote. Then intriguingly, the script fragments. But this seems to, so the script fragments. But this seems to be a reference to the Song of Songs. Let him kiss me with kisses of the mouth, and so too to the love that is stronger than death. The golden legend of Jacobus de Varenne, the most popular collection of saints' stories in the Middle Ages, describes how a particular group of Christians began to be persecuted in Jerusalem. 7 of them were set adrift in the Mediterranean in a small boat. Eventually, they were washed ashore in a place east of the town known today as Marseille. In the center of a great cliff rising above the shore, it is still possible to see the cave where Mary Magdalene, who stepped out of that boat, spent the last 30 years of her life. She is usually depicted penitent, naked apart from her long red hair. A painting of her by Fra Bartolomeo in a small garden chapel near Florence shows her with her jar of oil used to anoint the feet of Jesus Christ. It is resting on a stone inscribed with the following words: "I have found him whom my soul loves." And that is the end of the chapter. And I'm glad, not because I wasn't enjoying it, but because my voice is done for the night. So that leads us to a shorter chapter, chapter 16, which we'll pick up next time. And the title for that one is The Tyranny of the Fathers, the Gnostics and the Neoplatonists, the Murder of Hypatia, Attila and Shamanism, and A Touch of Zen. So we will get into that one next time. But for now, we are done. And let's see who's around. Mr. Blitzer was on earlier, but he's not now. Hot Dog Raw Dog is on, playing Doom Eternal. You know what? I'm just gonna call it. We're just gonna leave it off there. I'm pretty wiped out for the night anyway. So I will see you all in the next one, which should theoretically be Monday, reading some Star Wars, but we'll see. I've been pretty sporadic about the Star Wars stuff lately. So, everybody have a good night, and I will see you in whatever the next one is.
Feeling shattered skies, watching teary blue eyes, wonder where I might find some peace of mind. Not lights like I've had, but more sophisticated into love relations. Now disassembling my own heart, 'cause my mind's a million places and giving up. So it's in my head. So tell me it's not happening. Tell me it's not happening. Surrender myself. I feel the world collapsing, but not lights like I've had, but more sophisticated into love relations. Now disassembling my own heart, 'cause my mind's a million places and giving up. So it's in my head. So tell me it's not happening. Tell me it's not happening. Surrender myself. I feel the world collapsing, but it's wonder where I might find some peace of mind.